I first started working for the architect, he would send me on site by myself. And I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'd be so nervous, but just being like thrown out into the world like that gave me the confidence that I needed to be like, I can go out on my own.
Welcome back to the Design Table Podcast. I am so excited for this one, particularly because I have Justine Nigro here with me, and she is a licensed architectural designer, and she is super passionate about creating better buildings for the next generations, and she loves to promote homes that provide self-sufficiency and living off the grid. How cool is that? Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
So the first thing that I want to know, and I know a lot of my audience and viewers want to know, is you are a licensed architectural designer. And then a lot of the people that watch Design Table are interior designers. So can you walk us through what the main difference is between those two roles? And if somebody who wanted to pursue architecture in particular, what is the kind of path that they would take, similar to maybe a path that you've taken?
So the main difference is interior design focuses on interiors and material selection, that kind of thing specifically. They can often broaden their horizons and do exterior work, but architectural design is more focused on the space planning, the structure of the space. We can do exterior design and interior in terms of millwork, where the structure is going to be, and coordinating mechanical, plumbing, structural, that kind of stuff. It's not interior design in terms of material selection, like furniture placement. We do focus on space planning to make sure that the spaces work for the people. And we always show, standard furniture sizes on our floor plans and that kind of thing. But we kind of leave the nitty gritty to the interior designers. The main difference, if you're looking from a schooling perspective, is I went to Fanshawe for architectural technology. It's a 3-year program, and we focus on the technical drawings, right? So we do the floor plans, we talk a little bit about furniture, but it's mostly on technical drawings, so details. How are materials relating to one another? Is the foundation wall and footing sized accordingly to carry the weight of the house? How is the roof designed? So it's more the superstructure rather than the core of the houses. And so our education is less on the creative, artistic side of it, and more on the technical.
So do you frequently work with HVAC engineers and all of that prior to the build or a renovation happening, and figuring out where the placement of the ductwork is going to be and things like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's very much, I would say, I guess it's more construction focused, right? Like, because you want to have those details pretty much down pat before you can invite any contractor to come and execute the plans for you.
Yeah.
So would you say that a part of the role for you as an architectural designer is to carry out the permitting process and, working with the city and kind of getting those drawings stamped? So what does that process look like for you, especially at your own firm and where you are the principal designer? So how do you manage that process?
Yeah, so every firm is different, right? Some firms will do design and build. My company specifically focus on the design portion. So basically from start, whether it's a builder or a homeowner as our client, we'll start as the initial consultation and the as-built conditions. So we'll do a site visit, we'll measure the entire space in question, meet with the client, discuss their needs and their wants, and then from there we go into design phase, which is usually floor plans, elevations, sections, whatever is required to kind of convey that initial design message to the client. From there, we either help them select a contractor and start talking about budget, or if they already have a contractor, we can get going right into permit phase. And that's where we take the design drawings, bring them up into more detail, show structural drawings, mechanical drawings, roof truss design, and site plan, because as you may know, we also have to follow zoning bylaw requirements. That relates to the parameters of the actual site. Where's your parking? What are the setbacks from the property lines? How tall can you build the building? What is the square footage? So we coordinate that as well. And basically we act as a consultant between the homeowner and all of the sub-consultants. So we coordinate all of the drawings required in that permit package, and then we provide a final package to the city or the homeowner to apply to the city themselves. But my BCIN covers small buildings and houses.
Okay.
So technically I am licensed and liable for the drawings, and I would apply for the permit on the homeowner's behalf.
Right.
Deal with the city, which is interesting most of the time.
Well, now I know right before we started filming, we were talking about how lengthy that process has become for, people such as yourself who have firms looking at new constructions and builders who are just trying to get homes up and running, but the permits take up such a long time. So I'm sure for you, that's a really big part of your job now, is like making that go through the pipeline and making sure the city gives that approval to you, and then you give the good news to the client.
Yeah, I find that some homeowners, they think they want to deal with the city themselves because maybe they could save money or they want to learn about the process. But once the city starts speaking their language, the client's always like, okay, you take care of it. This is too much. So I like to be the liaison between the client and the city because it makes it easier for the client, and it also helps to streamline the process, right? Because if there is something with the drawings that need to be changed, but the homeowner applied for the permit, then it's like a middleman that you don't really need.
Right.
So typically I'll say, just let us deal with the permit, and then once it's done, we hand it over to them and they can start building.
Right, and this is really interesting because your line of work is very different from, let's say, my line of work, right? Even though we are within the same industry, and that's why I was so excited to chat with you, because I really want to discuss of your day-to-day journey and how you work with clients and how you work with contractors. And I guess someone like me or people who are looking to do interior designs, they would come after you've kind of handed over the drawings and the plans, and then, or maybe you also sometimes work with interior designers like throughout the process, and you also collectively give an interior package, and like, I don't know, maybe that is something that people would love to collaborate on, right?
Yeah, totally. I love collaboration. I always tell the clients that if you already have an interior designer and a contractor, let's bring them on board like from day one.
Right.
Because it's so much more streamlined and a better experience for everybody to have all the consultants on your team. I like being on the initial phase of the project because I feel like it's my baby.
Right. And there's a lot of autonomy for you to like make creative decisions.
Yeah. And I like having that personal experience with the homeowner or the builder, whoever the client is, to actually bring that dream from like a sketch on a napkin to an actual drawing.
Right. Yes.
I find that it's a subconscious message that an architectural or like a planner is sending, because the way that a space feels, somebody might not know why they feel that way in that space, but it's because the ceilings are a bit higher, or like, the window is placed here rather than in this spot. And you could definitely achieve that with color and furniture selection, soft furnishings, but sometimes it's like, I don't know why this space feels good, but it feels amazing.
Right. That's true. And it's because of those details. That's right.
That you plan into the project.
Right. So I guess this is a perfect segue for us to dive into sustainable design and what that means and why it's important to you, because when it comes to someone who's looking at a floor plan, I'm sure you think about where the sun is rising from and setting, and so where should we place the windows so that there's most amount of optimal like natural light coming through the windows and things like that. So what does sustainability really mean to you, and how do you apply that into your everyday work?
So sustainability has quite a few definitions depending on who you ask. For me, it means mindful design, and specifically going back to the whole floor plan thing, is not having so much wasted space. I hate hallways, right? Like long, narrow hallways with no natural light.
Right.
And I think that if you could, if you break down sustainability, it's more about being mindful at the start of a project and thinking, what are their needs versus their wants? Like if you really want a formal dining room, how often do you use that dining room?
Right.
Are you using it 3 times a year for large family gatherings? Then to me, that's a waste of space. Doesn't matter how much money you have. I don't want to design you a 13 by 20 dining room that you're never going to use, right? So for me, it's about having the mindfulness implemented at the start of the project to create properly functional spaces that feel good. And like you said, window placement. With new builds, it's easier to control because I can orient the house a certain direction that takes advantage of the sun and the wind at different times of the day, different times of the year. With renovations and additions, it's a bit harder because you're working with an existing structure. And then also the material selection, not only in interiors, but like for your windows and your doors are gaping holes in your walls. If you're going to cheap out on those, then what's the point of building this multi-million-dollar custom house?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so I always try to encourage clients either go with like a really high quality double pane window, or if you can afford it, a triple pane, because they're going to last longer. They're going to save you on your mechanical costs, which is a good sustainable design aspect. And you want them to perform and look good, right? Because they're features in a house. And they're also things that you don't want to change as often as they might have to be changed if they're terrible quality, right? Like you want your windows to last a long time. Same with things that you don't see, right? Like your mechanical system. Most people don't care about how they get heat in their house. They just want it to be comfortable.
But it's a big part of like how your house functions and the amount of energy that it takes. So that's a really good point that, you know, sustainability just doesn't mean recycling and all that. It means in the entirety of how the house operates. Like if you're going to be replacing your windows after every 10 years, then that's waste. And that's just like, you obviously throw your windows away to get the new ones. So, but if you get the right ones that last you like 30 years plus, then, you know, that's a better way of living. So.
Yeah. And it's also about just going back to the things that you don't see. It's like, it's the insulation. Not only what type of insulation, but how much. Are you just building like minimum code because you want to get a spec house built and move on to the next house? Or can you afford to build better than code? And how airtight is the house? Is there drafts and leaks everywhere? Because that's going to increase your life cycle cost of the house in terms of your mechanical systems.
And I feel like this is something that comes with experience. Like a lot of aspiring designers who get really overwhelmed and like intimidated, they're like, we don't know like how the structure works and things like that. I'm like, you will never learn if you don't do it, right? And I know prior to us sitting down, you mentioned that you were working for an architect for 5 years and then you started your business in 2019. So you've taken time to rack up the experience, figure out from trial and error like what works, what doesn't work. So I guess my kind of little advice is it all comes with time, right? Like rather than just knowing right off the bat out of school, because when you graduate from school, you said yourself you don't have any practical experience. So.
I think school's a little overrated. I learned like in the first 6 months of working for the architect way more than I learned in school, because it's a hands-on application. And like in school, you know, your instructors are in college, they're usually professionals in the industry, but sometimes even their knowledge is a bit dated. You want to get out there and talk to the contractors. And even like in my own business, if I don't know something, I'll call a seasoned contractor who's also a colleague and a friend and be like, hey, Kevin, how do I do this? Can you tell me like what's the best material to use? And he'll give me his opinion. And then I'll still do some research just to make sure that I feel like it's the best choice. But it's about reaching out. And if you can find the contractors and the consultants that support you and want you to grow and you feel the same way about them, then you got to like hold them close.
Right.
Because they're going to be your greatest asset in terms of learning and growing as a new designer. Because even like when I first started working for the architect, he would send me on site by myself. And I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'd be so nervous. But just being like thrown out into the world like that gave me the confidence that I needed to be like, I can go out on my own. And even now, like being a female on site, we're still outnumbered. But you gotta like, as a woman, even as an interior designer, like they expect you to be a woman, which is whatever. But even being on site with all these men on the construction industry, you gotta rule that room.
Right? You're so right, because I've walked in sometimes sheepish because, you know, I know that the plumber knows what he's talking about, but I know that I want to get a wall mounted faucet installed. Like that is a non-negotiable for me. But then I'm like sheepish to kind of push for it because the plumber will be like, no, it's hard to do, right? But like at the end of the day, if you command that voice in the room, plumbers can do anything. Like they can move it around, but if you let them not move it, then you're stuck with just a regular faucet, right? So I totally agree with that, and it's super important to be assertive when you're trying to share your designs, because if you don't do that from the beginning, then miscommunication happens. Contractors assume something and do something, and then the clients are like, why is they're not a faucet where I wanted it to be. So.
And even from an interior design perspective, right? Like you're designing the things that people see and use every day. So if they think a wall-mounted faucet is going to be here for their pots, but it's like off by 6 or 8 inches, it's like, well, I can't fill it if it's off to the side. You know what I mean? Like it's got to be exact.
Yes. And that's where the technical expertise comes in place too, which is another kind of, you know, myth that I frequently solve with the people that message me. It's like, it's not just all about material selection and tile and all that. Like sooner or later, you will have to get a good understanding of technical drawings and understanding how piping works in the walls and how HVAC works. That's the only way that you'll grow. Like, and that's the only way you'll get those really like Pinterest worthy jobs, right? Like you won't get those if you only know how to pick color and things. So technical
and even
is really important.
Something as simple as flooring. Like if you know as the designer that you want to put a really heavy marble floor or something in a hallway, then the designer and the contractor needs to know that because the floor needs to be reinforced to support that material,
and all that, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of planning involved, but it's always a fun experience. Every project is different. Every client is different. And even like we do tiny houses as well. And even though we deal with some standard models, every project is still different. Like no matter what, even if it's a set model, the site is going to be different, or the client is going to want to move something or make it a bit more custom. So
I want to talk a little bit about tiny homes because I love that concept and I'm always watching videos around them, and I know you've worked on a few. So I want to know, is it true that within the Canadian climate and environment, is there a little skepticism around tiny homes working or not working? Because people say that, oh, it's a great concept, but when you actually start to go and live in it and like have it as a lifestyle, it's not the best. And there's you know, a few vloggers that like talk about this, but you're an expert, so I wanted to get your input on what are the benefits, what are the downsides, when is the right time for someone to consider moving into a tiny home and all that kind of jazz.
So I think to start, living in a tiny house is way more than just living in a tiny house. It's a whole lifestyle, right? I find that a lot of our clients are outdoorsy people. So in the summer or the winter, it seems like their living space is extended outside of the home, which means that, you know, if you have a family and a dog and a kid in a tiny house, it can seem really tight. But if you have a massive deck or you love being outside in the winter time and you have the space on your site, then you're not in that house all the time 24/7, right?
That's a very interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. It's also a mindset because you have to minimize your life, the stuff, all the things. Like there's no space for a nice face with some eucalyptus. Like there's no space for that, right? But it's fun. It can be a challenge. I know that a lot of clients are like, okay, we want to go tiny. We want it to be like 8 by 24. And I'm like, have you sat yourself in an 8 by 24 space? Because you need to actually visualize yourself in that space.
Right.
And then maybe we go to like a 12 by 40 because it's a bit more reasonable for their needs. And they're like, well, we want 2 bedrooms and we want a master bath with a spa shower. And I'm like, okay, this is a tiny house. Let's backtrack a little bit. But my best advice for people looking to go tiny is to try to get in a tiny house. One of the best chances is there's actually a yearly tiny house show in Ancaster.
What?
They just started it last year. Today's the second year. I think it's July or August long weekend. And they have multiple tiny house builders that bring houses to the show and you can actually walk through them.
And that's a really good idea.
Yeah, like stand at your kitchen sink, sit on that little toilet or like, you know, climb up to the loft and see how small those spaces actually feel. And it helps a lot to visualize yourself in one of those spaces to actually be there and understand, you know, the scale of it. And do I really need, you know, like all of my devices and like 3 computers? Well, maybe I can't work from home anymore, right?
That's true, right?
Or maybe I can work from home, but my coffee table is also a dining table, is also an office desk.
3 in 1,
right?
Yeah.
And that's really, I find that I always try to push the millwork budget for tiny houses because you want your furniture to do tasks and serve multiple functions so that you can have, like I said, 1 coffee table that serves 3 functions in a space. Something that not a lot of people consider is where are you going to put it? Because you can have a beautifully designed tiny house on a trailer, but if you don't have a property to put it on, then you can't legally live in it, right? So like if you're wanting to stay in a municipality in the city or even like out in the suburbs or in an agricultural area, you still need to follow the local zoning bylaw.
Right.
To make sure you can actually put that house on the site. So you have to follow building height, setback requirements. Sometimes the tiny houses have to be connected to municipal services. So you can't have a composting toilet. It has to be a flush toilet. Some places, like we did one in London. London doesn't like to see the axle of the trailer.
Oh, okay.
Like the actual trailer bed.
Yeah.
They don't want it to look like it's a trailer house,
okay.
right? So for that project, we had to put it on helical piles as the foundation, and then provide skirting around the bottom of the structure so that it looked like it was a permanent house.
Right.
Some people are like, well, I'm just going to tow it around, and I'm going to be a digital nomad. I'm like, that's sweet, but you need a vehicle to tow it.
Right.
And even that, like, there's certain height restrictions for driving it down the road.
On the road, yeah.
In Ontario and in Canada. So there's a lot of, like, boring regulation stuff.
Which people need to get acquainted with prior to even thinking about doing something like that.
It can get really cloudy, though, and it's really dry information.
Yeah.
So when I have a client contact me and they're like, oh, well, we did this research. I'm like, that's cool, but I'm going to do it again.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. Yeah. Because, you know, as a professional in the industry, I'm more familiar with the zoning bylaws. I've dealt with a lot of the municipalities. So I like to just make sure that we are okay to put it where you want to put it. And then let's start the design process.
That makes sense.
And in terms of the climate, like, a tiny house is still a house. So for me, and I usually work with Tiny Footprint Homes. They're a builder out of Clinton near Grand Bend area. We design and build Ontario Building Code designed houses. So basically, you can either build to the Ontario Building Code or the CSA, the Canadian Standard Association, for manufactured homes. If you find a builder that's like, we don't need to follow any regulations, then I'd probably run away. Because if you want to legally build in that space or live in that space, then you're going to have the city knocking on your door asking, is this code built? Do you get a permit for this?
And that happens often.
Well, it happens enough that people are like, oh, shoot, I should have found somebody that actually builds to code.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And going back to the climate question, the code built house has minimum standards for insulation, for living, HVAC, all that, right? So as long as your builder builds the floor, wall, roof with adequate insulation and all your air barriers are sealed and your mechanical system is suitable, then you should be able to live in it wherever you bring it.
So it doesn't really matter whether the house has siding or brick or anything, as long as the insulation is up to code, then it's fine if it's applied into a trailer.
And the most important thing with a tiny house, in my opinion, is ventilation. Because if you're cooking a pot of pasta or you're taking a shower, the amount of steam that's created in that tiny space is going to have mold in your walls within a couple months.
That is such a good point,
So you need to make sure you have mechanical ventilation, not just windows that open, but like proper airflow, because that space will get really hot in the summer if it's not properly ventilated, and humid like pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right?
It's gonna tarnish.
So that's I would say that's my most important thing, is making sure that there's adequate ventilation.
I mean, these are all of the things that, you know, you as a designer would think about and the client will not. So I think like one of the biggest values of hiring someone to manage that, because you will think of every little detail, obstacle, hurdle that may arrive based on the lifestyle that the client has told you about. Like, this is what I like doing, and this is how I like to read a book every day. So you can be like, well, then that's, this window is not going to work here for you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's
totally.
that's really, really helpful. So we've talked a lot about tiny homes and what are the different components that are involved in making it. But I also want to talk about the money saving aspect of it, because that is, I think that, rather than just downsizing their living, they're also wanting to downsize the cost of their living. So does it actually work, or is it actually more money for people to do something like this? Because I've heard both perspectives, but I want you to clear that, situation and tell us.
So it really depends. If you already have a property that you want to put the house on, then that's an expense that you've already paid, right? Like maybe it's your parents' farm and they're paying the mortgage on that, and you just have your tiny house in an area on their property.
And it stays there. It doesn't Usually
I feel like almost all of our clients, they actually just park them in one spot.
Okay.
And they keep it there for 20, 25 years. Like they can be moved, but usually they're actually not. And so yeah, the site, if you have to purchase property to put the house on, then that could be a big expense, right? Depending on where you want to move it to. Right. If let's say you own a house and you want to have your parents or your child live in the backyard and there's enough space, then that house is already being paid for by somebody else. Right. And if I want to put my tiny house in your backyard, I might pay you rent, a minimal amount to have my house on your property. But it's more ideal when you already have somewhere to put it, right? Because that expense is usually taken care of already. In the long term, your monthly utility bills are going to be so much cheaper than what you're used to paying, right? Like if you're paying $200 in hydro a month for a 2,500 square foot house, it's going to be drastically less in a 500 square foot or even less house, right? Yeah. And then also for people who aren't planning on living in the spaces themselves, like let's say as a property owner, you want to put a tiny house in your backyard to rent out. It's a really quick way to get it built because you can get it manufactured in a tiny house builder's shop. And they just they build it in, I don't know, a couple months, not even, and they ship it to your property and then you're good to go. You just install it and in an instant, it seems like you can have renters into that space, paying you rent every month. A lot of people are using them for Airbnbs, or even if you have your parents who visit every 6 months or something, you can put them in the tiny house outside of your space. So it's a good passive income opportunity for people if you have property and you want to put one or multiple tiny houses. And it's a good, like I said, opportunity for people to get into the housing market. Because you could build a tiny house for, I don't know, let's say 100, 150,000 for simple basic house, which is significantly cheaper than any house on the market,
especially right now. For someone who is passionate about this topic and who wants to educate themselves more about what sustainable living even means, what kind of resources they can use to further educate themselves, and also how can they start implementing some of these sustainable practices in their everyday life, whether they're designers or architects or someone who is just wanting to learn more about it.
So as a design professional, I would say to look into the pretty good house concept. It's fairly new in the world of design. It was created by a group of architects in Maine. And basically it kind of takes, I don't know if your listeners have heard of Passive House Institute or LEED. Those are accreditation systems that you need to pay hefty fees for, and you get a silver star when you meet all the points. But the pretty good house concept is a bit more user-friendly. There's no certification system. It's you buy the book, you watch the videos, and then you just design and build it based on basic principles. And those are usually site orientation. So what is the direction of the house on the site? How are you relating to the sun, the wind, all of that? Are there spaces that families can grow and stay in for their whole lifetime? Is it a generational home? Is there space for your in-laws to come live when they get older? And then the materials, like we've mentioned, the insulation that you're using, your mechanical systems, the windows and doors, all of that is part of the pretty good house concept. Basically, pretty good house is better than code, because we all know that code is the minimum standards, right? So it's better than code, but it's not crazy.
Unattainable,
yeah. It's supposed to be more user-friendly and understandable for anybody to just buy the book and be oh, I can at least get started on the design process before I hire a professional, and understand the concepts of the pretty good house. So I like to try to inform clients on that concept. And then, as a professional, I would just say to always think about being mindful about the materials you're selecting. Where are they coming from? What is the travel distance? Are you ordering stuff from that's made in a third world country off Wayfair that's going to break in 3 months? Or are you supporting a local artisan? And maybe it costs a lot more, but that piece of furniture is going to last for years and years. For me, it's about longevity of the materials as well. So as an interior designer, if you're selecting materials, you want to think about not only does it function now, but is it going to function in the long term? And if I do need to throw it out, what components of that material have to go to the landfill and what components can actually be composted or biodegraded right?
Yeah, we don't think about those things, especially when you're trying to chuck away furniture. Like, yeah, you can, sell it and have someone else like reuse the product, but sometimes you don't think about whether it's disposable or not, because you don't know if the fabric of your sofa is going to be able to compost. Like,
totally,
you don't know that. Even I myself have to, educate myself on that more.
And there's always room for growth and room for education. Like, I don't consider myself an expert on the topic at all. I think the most important thing for a professional is to understand that you're not going to know everything, right? Like, I hire energy auditors to tell us, like, is the R value actually saving that much money in the future?
Okay.
If the window's this much smaller, or it's on this wall rather than that wall, how much energy savings are we going to have? And that's not my, like, I'm technical, but I'm definitely not that techie. So I have that professional give us the rundown on our design and our wall construction and our floor construction, to be like, if you do this, if you make this change, it'll be this much more efficient. And then we take that to the client.
Right.
And that's like a whole nother industry that don't have the mental capacity.
No, but that's
learn,
a really
right?
good, like, suggestion, is that you can always bring in that outside expert to come in, like, kind of walk you through. Like, you don't necessarily have to take the entire responsibility. And so I really like that, actually. This is something that even I can look to if I have a client in the future who is very much mindful about sustainability. I can be like, don't worry, I'll bring someone in to help us do that.
And I find that, like, the construction industry in general is usually really friendly and helpful,
right?
But specifically the, like, sustainable construction industry is so welcoming, because they really want to push
that agenda forward, right?
And like, I've leaned on a lot of people who I've never even met in person before, just like on email, and they've helped me so much to understand, like, which material is better, where can I get it, where's like, who's the best supplier. There's a lot of resources. It's just a matter of reaching out.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're doing obviously great work. I've seen your work online, and like, you're just killing it at the game. So if people who are interested in learning more about your business and what you do, and maybe getting in touch with you to maybe plan their future tiny home, like, where can they find you?
So we're on Instagram at the Hive Design Co. We also have a website by the same name, and my email is Justine at thehivedesignco.com,
which will be all linked below.
Yes, thank you. And just send me an email. We always offer a complimentary discovery call.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
No
it was
problem.
So much fun, and I learned way too much that I didn't know just an hour ago. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
And we'll be keeping in touch with everything that you're doing.
Great. Thank you.